Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about unrealistic deadlines. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, how do you deal with unrealistic deadlines at work? I crash and burn, and that's about it really. Um I usually start by communicating that I don't think we're going to make it in time or that this is an unrealistic deadline, and then I've done my part. Because the reality is that if someone decides to not listen to me when I say that I needed this amount of time to solve the problem and they still have a sharp deadline or so forth and so forth, then we're not really having a conversation anymore. Then we have a person who's telling me what needs to happen and not listening to what I have to say, that when I say that that's not possible, then we're not in solution mode, then we're in opinion mode. And I'm fine with having a manager who has an opinion, and then we'll just crash and burn. But it's very rare that I get to this state anymore. It used to be more common in the early days when I was a little bit more junior, because you're scared to let anybody down, so you sort of give them false hope. But instead nowadays you can solve the problem more efficiently by just being honest and upfront and say that if we're going to make this, and I mean, I never speak in terms of, oh, this cannot be done. It's more a question of, here are all the things we need to do to make that happen. And then I put the price tag on it, usually. Like, basically you explain the full scope of what you need to do, and then you help and guide your stakeholders to understand whether or not this is feasible or not. And then what usually happens is that you go into scoping mode, where you do tactical scoping, as we might call it, tacticals, where you might be able to scope down, okay, we can throw away these features or these things, or we remove that. You basically slim things down until the deliverable becomes more realistic. And that ties into my thing that I might put that on my gravestone. The problem is what the problem is. And that basically is my big philosophical. It's probably going to be trivial by most people's standards, but it is the big thing for me. The thing that I keep on saying to people: if you have a problem, there are only two ways to solve it. Either you increase capacity for solving the problem, or you change the problem. These are the two ways you can fix it. There's no other way of doing it. So I've said a few examples before. If you're gonna move a mountain and you only have a bucket and a small shovel, that's gonna take some time. And if somebody's unhappy with how long it's going to take, then you either reduce the mountain size, or like tell me I don't have to move the mountain, I might have to move the sandcastle over there, or you give me some more heavy equipment so I can do it faster. It's the same thing with coding. If you want all of this stuff and the code base is in the state it is, we have the talents at hand, like the resources we have available, like the delivery processes, all the stuff that comes into play when you're going to ship something. Well, unless you start moving things away or descoping things or increasing the capacity or the streamlining the work or doing all these things that you should be doing, of course, then yeah, it's going to take the time it takes. And something that this is very unintuitive to a lot of software developers, because they it's very easy for you to start thinking that it's your fault because you're not good enough. That can be the case, I'm not gonna lie. Of course you can be better, but at some point it starts becoming unrealistic. Like, it sort of becomes silly there, where you're starting to ask inhuman things from people. And this is another philosophical perspective you can have, which I like, which is it the environment or the individual's responsibility to resolve the situation? Because you can always claim that the individual should do better, just as the individual can always claim that the environment should be more forgiving. But the reality is, and that brings me back to, the problem is what the problem is. Like, if you have a developer who is at a certain talent level and you have a specific sort of problem, it's going to take them that amount of time to fix this problem. And if you don't have a way to replace that developer, increase their capacity somehow, or like help them, or like reduce the scope of the problem or something like that, then you're in a deadlock. Then it's a collision. There's nothing then you're going to fail and crash and burn. And nothing you say or do will change that fact. And so that's why I say usually I don't have these problems anymore, because I never get into these situations and I haven't been in these situations for a while now, due to the fact, as I said, when I explain this to a stakeholder, I usually just tell them that I don't think we're going to make it in that time, and they don't want to hear that. And I say, it's really, I mean, I can promise you everything you want. It's more a question of how sure do you want to be that you get an accurate estimate when you go and talk to your manager. And then usually we very quickly go, because most people are rational, like they will start to realize that, all right, maybe we need to descope some stuff, because I'm past that point where I will just tell them things to make them happy, and then sort of have to deal with the anxiety of having an unrealistic deadline. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way that I'm not saying that this is how everybody deals with unrealistic deadlines. Like a classic one is that the managers, they force you to work late, or like they might push things on you or so forth, and you feel shit and you start trying to just hack things together just to meet that deadline, which is a pattern that you can absolutely start following. And sometimes you have to hack things together to make to meet the deadline. But sometimes the reality is that the problem, as I said, the problem is what the problem is. And if you can't descope things, like basically simplify the problem or increase your capacity for solving the problem by adding more developers or things like that, then you're going to miss the deadline. And I very rarely feel anymore, at the very least, that is such a horrible thing in the end, because the reality is that usually software deliverables and products and so forth, you can fail a deadline in many cases and still like deliver it fairly quickly thereafter. But the long and short of it is, guys, that sometimes you will meet people that have unrealistic expectations. They want you to they want you to produce amazing results, or like to make a car analogy, like they want you to build a Ferrari, and they give you a budget for building a bicycle. And in those situations, I just suggest that you do what I do, and that is to explain, like, very in the nicest way possible, that you don't think that this is realistic, and then try to have a rational conversation with them. But if you hear that this is not a conversation, they're basically telling you that this needs to happen because of this A, B, and C. Like, you can't force them to change their way of thinking. And the reality is that if this is all the money they have, all the time they have, and they have to make this thing happen, then you're dead already. Like, then as I said, then you can't do one of those two things I talked about. You can't change your situation, and then you just have to plan for the inevitable crash when it happens. And that's something that a lot of software developers forget to do, and sort of you take it on yourself and blame yourself because you can't be inhumanly fast or unrealistically fast or something like that. And my suggestion to you is to try to grow out of that a bit. You should do your best and be the best software developer you can be. Don't think that I'm saying that you should be lazy or something like that, but you should also understand when you're already, like, when you lost before you even started. And that does happen because there's a lot of situations where the company needs something that they should have thought about this months ago, or they should have done 100 things before you got to this situation. They did not, and now they're desperate, or like there's some person who behaves like this is the end of the world, and you can't save them. The reality is that you can't save them because the point of no return was passed months ago. Have a great day.